This is the Yocal Idaho Midweek Report, where we give you a quick overview of the news in Idaho for the last week. This week, with our first batch of stories, we'll be looking at the East Coast port strikes and how that's actually not affecting our port here in Idaho, but that doesn't mean people aren't buying like it. Also, as we've talked about many times about Proposition 1, did you know there is Proposition 2? Also looking at establishment versus grassroots media and how it looks like both of them are getting to an equal footing, particularly the grassroots with the establishment. And then we'll close out the first segment with BSU's legal bill that it's giving Idahoans over the trials that it's had to deal with. Despite the ongoing dock worker strike in the East Coast there, which has caused some panic buying and emptying shelves across the country, also here in Idaho. Surprisingly, Idaho, which if you didn't know has an inland port up there in Lewiston, remains unaffected, even though Lewiston is located over 300 miles from the Pacific Ocean. It doesn't anticipate any direct impact from the strikes, which I think I've done other segments on. If you want to look into the Lewiston port, Idaho does have a freshwater port that we can get stuff through. But specifically the details about the strike and why it's unaffected. Unlike coastal ports, Lewiston doesn't employ union workers, eliminating the risk for labor shortages. However, the port is monitoring the potential indirect effects at exporting ports in Portland and Vancouver that are nearby to it. Despite the port's stability, some Idaho shoppers have begun to bulk buy. Some of the reports seem reminiscent of pandemic-era shortages. Local stores are already posting some signs about unavailable items. Because of that, I would recommend not going and crazily buying. They'll be there, and especially if we have a port that's still open. But the overall takeaway is while the East Coast strike continues, affecting dozens of ports from Maine to Texas, Lewiston's unique position as the most inland port in the West provides a measure of security for Idaho's supply chain, knowing that we have a port up there that won't be affected by these strikes. And speaking of being affected, you've probably seen the Proposition 1 or vote against or for all over the state if you've been traveling around it all, and probably are quite familiar with it because there's a lot of education stuff going out. If you haven't, check out last week's Midweek Report. But there's a second, less discussed measure, House Joint Resolution 5 or JR5. This proposed constitutional amendment aims to explicitly state that only U.S. citizens can vote in Idaho's elections. For a little bit of context, it has already passed the legislature. House Joint Resolution 5 would add language to Article 6, Section 2 of Idaho's Constitution, specifying that, quote, no person who is not a citizen of the United States shall be a qualified elector in any election held within the state of Idaho. For the supporters of it, they argue it is a necessary thing to protect election integrity because only people who are citizens of the United States should be voting in its elections. Opponents to it say that it is redundant and could create barriers for new citizens that really just don't need to be there, man. Come on, be nice. Unlike Proposition 1, this amendment has received bipartisan support in the legislature, so it's not just a wholly Republican thing or something else. There's some people coming across the aisle on this. But in conclusion, moving towards November, voters will see arguments for and against it on their ballots. So hopefully they'll be a little bit informed when they vote on it to decide whether to enshrine this citizenship requirement in Idaho's Constitution for voting. And speaking of being informed and politics, in a report from the Gem State Chronicle, highly recommend you go check them out, we see that Idaho's political landscape continues to shift towards more grassroots media outlets, which was pretty exciting, challenging the influence of mainstream media and traditional endorsements. The reasons for this is organizations like the Association of Commerce and Industry, or IACI, are facing some stiff competition from more conservative groups, such as the Idaho Freedom PAC, or IFPAC, if you want to go for the full acronym there. This change is reflected in recent election outcomes, where IFPAC-backed candidates have made substantial gains, despite having significantly less funding than their IACI-supported counterparts. The main reason why this is probably happening more and more is the rise of more independent media sources, particularly like local Yocal Idaho, which you all love, and the Gem State Chronicle, and many others. I would argue that many of these are playing a crucial role in this shift, with these outlets providing more alternative conservative perspectives that the Main Street or more establishment media wouldn't let come out, and equally in-depth analysis as well that really empowers you and voters and constituents to have a more diverse availability of information to make an educated decision on. But in conclusion, the impact of these grassroots efforts is evident in the increasing success of conservative candidates, with these outlets leaning more conservative, in primary elections, demonstrating that principles and targeted messaging can really effectively compete with big budget campaigns like those of KTVB7 or others. This shift does signify a growing demand for a media that aligns more closely with the conservative values and local interests that most Idahoans hold true to. Speaking of a lot of money, Boise State University's legal costs in the Big City Coffee lawsuit have surpassed the initial reported $989,458, with the full extent of expenses remaining rather unclear due to additional unreported fees from another law firm, Fording Fauser. Specifically, the Idaho Department of Administration, which pays this firm, has refused to disclose the amount, citing state code provisions. This lack of transparency contrasts with BSU's openness about its part of the cost, so I guess a little bit of a plus there for BSU. Public reports show that the Department of Administration's paying Fording Fauser over $350,000 across 3 fiscal years. But it is unclear if these payments were related to the Big City case. The reason for the split in legal representation and payment between BSU and the state remains unexplained. So, big government, I don't know. But moving forward, the situation does highlight the issues with the transparency in public spending and the complexity of legal defense costs in some of these more high profile cases involving state institutions. So, we'll have to see what comes out of that. Which, if you've liked the Midweek Report so far, please do us a favor and hit the like button on YouTube, Rumble, or Twitter. It helps us reach more folks who love Idaho just like you. Speaking of some wonderful things that make us Idahoans proud, Governor Brad Little has commended Boise State University for its decision to forfeit a women volleyball match. Now, you might be asking why, which it was against St. Joseph State University, which had a male player identifying as a woman on the team. Probably not a good thing there. BSU's choice aligns with the spirit of Idaho's Fairness and Women's Sports Act, which we talked about a couple of midweek reports back, which was signed into law by Little. The governor praised BSU on social media, emphasizing the importance of player safety and the fairness in women's sports. This move by BSU does represent a refreshing stance from them in the ongoing debate about transgenderism in athletics and collegiate sports, which is not going so well. The decision has sparked controversy, however, within the Mountain West Conference, with other schools also considering similar action. It's almost like if you stand up, other people might follow. Wink. But in conclusion, Governor Little's support underscores Idaho's commitment to maintaining traditional values in sports and protecting women's athletic opportunities, which we are all for here in the state, because we love our traditional values. Also, sometimes they go a little too far, but that's its own thing. I'm in your camp there. And speaking of traditions here in Idaho, this year's devastating wildfires in Idaho have reignited frustrations over federal public land management, because we know the federal government does a wonderful job at managing those. With over 60% of Idaho under federal control, many residents are questioning the effectiveness of the current policies, with critics arguing that federal mismanagement has increased wildfire risks and limited local control. Obviously, the local control part. But the reason that the frustrations have come up now is the American Lands Council is advocating for a shift towards state and county level management, believing it will lead to more responsive and effective land stewardship. They argue that local control could better balance conservation with economic needs and fire prevention, which we need a lot of that right there, with some Idaho lawmakers supporting Utah's legal challenge, which they're currently in, challenging the federal land retention. They're hoping that will end up at the Supreme Court, that we'll get a ruling that could reshape Western land policies, specifically with the federal government here. But moving forward, until that happens, as the debate kind of intensifies on this, some Idahoans are calling for solutions to protect both land and local interests, emphasizing the need for a management approach that respect Western state sovereignty and really allow us to actually do with our land what we want to do with our land, rather than someone in Washington, D.C. And speaking of those wonderful wildfires, a significant one one, dubbed the Valley Fire, is burning close to Boise, threatening the city's eastern edge there. The fire, which sparked last Friday morning along Highway 21, has already consumed, as of the recording of this, approximately 4,000 acres in the Boise foothills. Residents north of the Warm Springs Avenue between Wild Horse Lane / Table Rock Road and Highway 21 are on high alert. While some evacuation orders have been downgraded, thank goodness, officials are urging residents to stay prepared if things get out of hand there. The Boise Fire Department, along with other agencies, as you can guess, is working tirelessly to contain this blaze since it's so close to Boise. Helicopters and ground crews are actively fighting the fire, some of them going and getting water from Lucky Peak up there, with some road closures in effect. As of the reporting of this, I want to stress that because we record this a little bit ahead of time. 2 local schools also were closed due to fire threats with it. In conclusion, Boise Fire Chief Mark Niemeyer praised the collaborative efforts of the multiple agencies involved in responding to this situation over there. Let's pray that it doesn't get Table Rock or some of the other really pretty stuff that's there in the Boise foothills. And speaking of Boise and our favorite city council, the Boise City Council has unanimously approved a pilot program, keyword there, pilot program, for a red light enforcement cameras, which if you don't know what those are, we'll get into that later, partnering with Ada County Highway District. This initiative, a first in Idaho, aims to address the increasing traffic violations and pedestrian fatalities that have been happening here in the valley. The cameras in question, and the reason why they're there, will use license plate reader technology to capture red light violations, so driving through red lights, while police officers review the footage before issuing tickets. So you might want to watch out of running any red lights in Boise. Mayor Lauren McLean emphasized this response to residents' requests for stricter traffic enforcement, while details like the camera types, locations, and program duration are yet to be determined, because why would they tell you that? The system is expected to enhance enforcement efficiency and safety due to the fact that it never has to sleep. The program could also aid in crash reconstruction and road design improvements, because you always have a record of what you're looking at there. But the overall takeaway is city officials highlighted this technology as a way to help maintain traffic flow compliance, especially when there's more aggressive out-of-state drivers, we'll put it that way, while reducing potential dangerous encounters between officers and drivers, which in Canyon County, we've seen plenty of those lately. The initiative also marks a significant step in Boise's effort to try to curb that and prevent that from moving over to Ada County. And speaking of lawbreaking, a Boise high school student was detained on September 30th after bringing an unloaded handgun to school. The incident was reported around 1:15 p.m., prompting swift action from the school administrator and police resource officer. Despite the student's initial reluctance to cooperate, officers discovered the weapon during a backpack search. Specifically, the student, who denied any intention of wanting to harm anyone, now faces juvenile detention charges, which include resisting, obstruction, and possession of a firearm school property. Shocker there. School officials emphasize that there is no ongoing threat, so if you're worried about something like that, don't need to. And the incident didn't trigger any lockdown or something like that because it was all under control. But the overall takeaway from that is the school principal informed parents, highlighting the importance of, if you see something, maybe say something, principal, if something's off. If any of the stories we've talked about is something that you haven't heard about and you think other people in Idaho should, please don't hesitate to share it. Your shares help us spread the word about our beautiful state and keep Idahoans informed. And speaking of crimes and going up a notch, Nicholas Umfenauer, the 29-year-old man involved in the hospital escape attempt in Boise last March, which you may remember, has been sentenced to life in prison. Specifically, viewers may recall our previous reporting on this incident, where Umfenauer ambushed and shot correctional officers at the St. Alphonsus Regional Medical Center to help a fellow gang member, Skylar Mead, escape. Umfenauer pleaded guilty to several felonies, including aiding and abetting escape and insulting law enforcement officers. Kind of cut and dry there. Judge Nancy Baskin described him as an unremorseful career criminal. and ruled he won't be eligible for parole for at least 40 years. Ooh, that's going to be a bit. But looking back at the aftermath of the incident, the attack left 3 officers injured, though all of them survived. Praise the Lord there. However, Umfenauer may face some additional charges related to a separate murder case. He's going 2 for 2 there. This sentencing brings some closure to the case that happened there, and the shock that kind of surprised a lot of us when we heard the news. I remember hearing it and was like, wait, what? What's happening down in Boise? But thankfully, the sentence does bring some closure to those that were shocked, me included in this, when it happened earlier this year. And keeping with the theme of crimes and going from handguns to explosives, a 39-year-old man in Pocatello, Cade Gabner, has been arrested on charges of unlawful possession of destructive devices or bombs. Specifically, the arrest came after an electrician working in Gabner's apartment reported seeing some suspicious items, including what appeared to be 15 to 20 homemade pipe bombs in a green ammo can. Concerning there, police executed a search warrant promptly after that, confirming the presence of suspected explosive devices and several AR-style rifles without serial numbers. No concern there. Idaho Falls Police Bomb Squad was called to assist with the situation. Gabner, who has been released on a $20,000 bond, not cheap, same cost for a used car lately, faces up to about 5 years in prison if convicted. He is scheduled for a preliminary hearing on October 8th. While charged, Gabner is presumed innocent until proven guilty. Like most cases, this incident, though, has raised some concerns, obviously, about some homemade explosives and ghost guns over in that area of the state for law enforcement. And speaking of things that used to go boom, but actually are doing some wonderful things now for Idaho, Idaho Falls is taking a bold step toward a nuclear-powered future, aiming to run entirely on clean nuclear energy by 2023. Idaho Falls Power is negotiating with Allo Atomics to purchase electricity from 7 Allo 1 reactors, each capable of powering 10,000 homes, if you're not into all the nerdy numbers. But specifically, these plans do build on Idaho's really rich history of nuclear history, which we've talked about before, and leveraging technology inspired by INEL's Marvel reactor, also have talked about that. The compact Allo 1 reactor specifically, no larger than a shipping container, if that gives you an idea there, promise reliability, carbon-free electricity 24/7, so you don't have to worry about any downtime like solar and other stuff. This $50 million project is expected to maintain current electricity costs while significantly reducing the city's carbon emission footprint that they would otherwise be making. Idaho Falls Power General Manager Bear Prairie emphasized nuclear as a viable option for clean, constant energy. Keep it on that constant. Solar and wind kind of struggle with that a little bit. Addressing the limitations also of hydropower expansion, which has not been favorable with environmentalists lately in the state. But in conclusion, this forward-thinking approach not only promotes environmental sustainability, which all environments love a lot, but also positions Idaho Falls at the forefront of the second atomic age, as it's being called, also giving a chance to showcase nuclear's potential for safe, efficient, and long-term power generation, which there's a little bit of stigma in history left over with nuclear. Hopefully these new modern systems, which it seems from the reports are going to be a lot more reliable. And speaking of sustainability here in Idaho, Bunker Hill Mine in Idaho's Silver Valley is on track for a significant revival, with production set to begin in early 2025. CEO Sam Ash recently shared updates on the mine's progress at the city council meeting, projecting 220 to 250 new full-time jobs upon its reopening. Specifically, for some context, for those not familiar with it, it was once the county's largest silver producer. Bunker Mill has undergone extensive upgrades since its 2020 purchase, including a refurbished processing plant and expanded Russell portal. The mine plans to extract 1,800 tons of ore daily when it initially fires up, but it could potentially increase to 2,500 tons. The ore will then be processed on-site and then shipped to a Canadian refinery. It'd be really nice if it was here in the States, though. With 5 years of reserve materials ready and unexplored areas, Bunker Hill aims for multiple decades of operation before it ever has to worry about closing down. But in conclusion, as you can guess, this is seen as quite a beacon of hope and revival for those up there in the Silver Valley, promising some economic revitalization after decades of dormancy with the mining industry kind of struggling up there. If you've loved the Midweek Report so far and want to keep up to date in all things Idaho, please make sure to subscribe and follow us so you don't miss any of our future content. And speaking of things up north, 2 constituents from District 2 are challenging Idaho State Senator Phil Hart's residency in his legislative district. Deborah Rose and Bruce Coe have requested Secretary of State Phil McGrain to investigate, alleging that Hart's listed address has been under construction for years and may not be his actual residency. Specifically, the Idaho Democratic Party highlighted this issue in a press conference outside a Kellogg property registered to Hart. Idaho law requires legislatures, if you're not familiar, to live in their districts for at least 1 year before running and throughout their term that they're there. Secretary McGrain noted that a similar complaint was investigated during the May primary. However, even though it was investigated, Hart still remained on the ballot there. Secretary McGrain noted that similar complaints were investigated during the May primary, with Hart remaining on the ballot. So you can take what you will with that. He doesn't anticipate a different outcome unless new information emerges and comes forward on this one. But moving forward, the challenge does underscore the importance of residence requirements in maintaining electoral integrity, with constituents from both political parties seeking transparency on this. We've seen that as well down here in the Valley with some stuff that the Democrats have had happen. And speaking of things down here in the Valley, Ada County has announced plans to auction off 27 acres of Expo Idaho, formerly Les Boys Park, for the development of a sports complex. The county is seeking a 30-year lease agreement with the highest bidder to construct a soccer-focused mixed-use stadium. Specifically, the facility is expected to seat at least 6,000, with the potential to expand to 11,000, and host professional and amateur sporting events, including soccer, lacrosse, football, and rugby, to name a few. Project, part of Phase 2 of Ada County's Expo Park project, aims to attract U.S. Soccer Federation-sanctioned Division I men and women's teams, but while it is referred to as a stadium, the rendering suggests multiple fields utilizing the existing grandstand, so that'll yet to be determined there to see what happens. But in conclusion, as the county hopes this public-private partnership will revitalize the area, with the base rent of $150,000 and a minimum of $9 million invested required from the lease. So, a lot of money moving around there. But speaking of money and growth, the Teton Valley Brands, the Idaho-based potato chips company you've probably seen in the stores at Albertsons, is experiencing some significant growth and expansion. The company is relocating from its 2,600 square foot facility in Nampa to a 14,000 square foot facility over there in Caldwell. Their operating space there, specifically with the annual sales currently at about $3 million. Oh my goodness. The newly appointed CEO, Matt Price, anticipates the exponential growth following this expansion. The larger facility will allow for increased production capacity, enabling Teton Valley to meet growing demands and potentially enter the private label market, which is kind of important for them there. This growth does come at an opportune time for them, as we've heard a lot of the wildfires over there in Oregon has really impacted the kettle chip manufacturing. This comes for them in a rather opportune time, as the recent wildfires, as you may remember, over in Oregon have impacted other kettle chip manufacturers. The company, which uses Idaho potatoes in its products, good for them, is expected to be in full operation in the new Caldwell location by the first quarter of 2025. So they'll move rather quick, positioning itself for a larger role in the potato chip industry, as Idaho should with our potato exports. And coming to our last story, and one of the things that exports need, transportation. The Idaho Department of Education and Transportation are teaming up for a rather unique and fun initiative for students, the first annual Name a Snowplow contest. Starting October 1st, 8th grade students across the state can submit creative names for snowplows within 15-character limit there, so it can't be something too crazy. You don't want to make a paragraph there. Specifically, the contest aims to engage students while promoting awareness of winter driving safety, because boy, do we need that here in Idaho. So many people moving here that do not know how to handle the snow. Two winning names will be chosen for each of Idaho's 6 regions, with the selected monikers displayed directly on the plow blades. Winners will receive a special visit from their named plow and its driver to discuss winner safety. This collaboration between education and transportation officials not only sparks some creativity, but also serves as a really interesting, innovative way for students to be involved in road safety and kind of to be able to give back and be involved in that process. But if you're someone that's interested in being involved in this, and bear with us homeschoolers and independent people out there, submissions are open until October 31st, with the winners announced in December when the snow usually flies. And as I tease there, homeschoolers and private schools can participate by emailing the transportation department directly. So you can go link in the description for that. Which, speaking of link in the description, I have to head out here. So thank you for listening to the entire report. It really does mean a lot. I sincerely hope you found it enjoyable and valuable. If you liked the Midweek Report, please make sure to check out all of our other content. We're working hard at it there. Also, if we missed any important points or provided incorrect information, please feel free to reach out to us via email at lyimedia@protonmail.com or on Twitter by tweeting me at local Yocal Idaho. With the small team we have, we're not able to cover everything, but we do our best to cover the most interesting and important stories. So thank you for your support and assistance. That's all for now. I wish you a fantastic rest of your week. Godspeed.